Meghan may have known Andrew before she met Harry.
Wasn't there some speculation that she was on Epstein's yacht at one point in time? There was like photos with her and Prince Andrew way back in the day when she was like in her early 20s.
They thought this secret would never come out, but it just did. Meghan Markle and Prince Andrew, a hidden connection, a paid relationship, 20 years of silence, shattered. Harry broke down in tears when he found out, and Charles, he was the last to know. The palace is in full panic mode right now. Documents have surfaced, witnesses are talking, and the truth is so shocking, so deeply buried, that even the people closest to the royal family never saw it coming.
Meghan Markle always loved the attention. She always loved the attention, which is why she is now using the Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor scandal to publicly taunt the royal family, push her own business.
You will not believe what has finally been uncovered. There are moments in the world of celebrity and royalty where a single claim, even one without solid proof behind it, is enough to set off a chain of events that becomes very difficult to stop. This is one of those moments. A story began circulating online and in certain media circles suggesting that Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, may have had a prior connection to Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, dating back more than 2 decades. The claim, which was put forward by a former British journalist, stated that he held documented proof of this alleged connection, stretching back to around 2001. Within hours of the claim gaining traction, it had already found its way into headlines, comment sections, and social media feeds across multiple countries. To understand why this particular allegation caused such an immediate reaction, you have to consider the context surrounding both individuals. Prince Andrew has been one of the most controversial figures within the British royal family for several years. His association with the late convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein led to a deeply damaging television interview in 2019, which is widely regarded as one of the most poorly received royal media appearances in recent memory. That interview, rather than calming public concern, intensified it significantly. The fallout eventually led to Andrew stepping back from his public royal duties, losing his military affiliations, and having his royal patronages removed. He later reached an out-of-court settlement in a civil lawsuit brought against him in the United States. Though he did not admit any liability, his reputation, by most assessments, has not recovered. Meghan Markle, on the other hand, has occupied a very different kind of public space. Since marrying Prince Harry in 2018 and subsequently stepping back from senior royal duties in 2020, she has worked to build an independent public identity, one centered on advocacy, media work, and various charitable and commercial ventures. Her profile has remained consistently high, and public opinion around her has always been sharply divided, particularly in the United Kingdom. For her supporters, she represents a modern and progressive voice. For her critics, she has been a source of ongoing controversy. The introduction of her name into a story also involving Prince Andrew was therefore never going to be a quiet or contained event. The former journalist who made the initial claim was described as someone who had been largely frozen out of royal reporting circles for a number of years, reportedly following past investigations into the private lives of senior royals. The fact that this individual was now coming forward with what he described as documented evidence was noted by observers as significant in itself, regardless of whether the claims turned out to be true. In media terms, the source mattered as much as the story. What exactly was being claimed? At its core, the allegation suggested that Meghan and Andrew had some form of connection before Meghan ever met Prince Harry. Speculation began circulating, including questions about whether Meghan had appeared in photographs with Andrew during her earlier years, when she was in her 20s and working as an actress. These were presented not as confirmed facts, but as open questions, the kind that generate significant online discussion even in the absence of solid answers. Within hours of the story beginning to spread, the response at the highest levels was notable. According to multiple reports, King Charles ordered an urgent internal review of the situation. This was not a public-facing response. There were no statements released to the press, no appearances before cameras. Instead, the reaction was quiet, measured, and focused on gathering information before making any decisions. Sources familiar with the palace's approach at the time indicated that the king's instructions were clear: trace where the claim had originated, assess how widely it was spreading across media platforms, and determine whether there was any credibility to the underlying allegation. The priority, as is typically the case in these situations, was to understand the full picture before taking any visible action. This kind of response is not unusual for the palace. Over the years, the institution has developed what might be described as a careful, deliberate approach to managing damaging stories. The default is rarely to engage publicly and immediately. More often, the preference is to assess, contain where possible, and respond only when necessary. The concern in this instance was not just about reopening difficult chapters from Andrew's past, which were already well documented and widely known. The more pressing worry was about what the story might do to broader narratives involving the Sussex household and their ongoing relationship, or lack thereof, with the working royal family. Across the Atlantic, in the city of Montecito in California, where Meghan and Harry have been based since leaving royal life, the news was landing in a very different environment. Reports at the time described Meghan as having been made aware of the circulating headlines through messages from her team. She did not respond immediately and publicly. Her instinct, according to those familiar with the situation, was to pause and think before acting. This is a strategy that carries its own risks. Silence in a news cycle that is moving quickly can be interpreted in many ways, and not all of them are favourable. When a story is gaining momentum and the subject remains quiet, the space left behind tends to get filled by speculation and, in many cases, by the louder voices that are not always the most accurate ones. For Meghan, there was an additional layer of complexity. She had spent years working to establish a public image that felt stable and self-determined. Any story connecting her to Andrew, even one built on thin or unverified evidence, had the potential to cut directly through that image. The allegations did not need to be proven to do damage. In the current media landscape, the act of asking a question publicly is often enough to plant doubt, and doubt, once planted, can be surprisingly difficult to remove. Meanwhile, in London, the online conversation was already running well ahead of any official response. Forums and social media platforms filled rapidly with theories, timelines, and analysis of old photographs. Unverified claims were being repeated so frequently that they began to take on the appearance of established facts. This is one of the defining features of how modern scandals develop. The speed at which information, accurate or otherwise, moves online means that by the time any kind of official clarification arrives, a significant portion of the audience has already formed an opinion. King Charles, by all accounts, was under no illusions about this reality. He had watched the digital world reshape the way public figures are perceived over many years, and he understood that the traditional tools of palace communication were not always sufficient in this environment. The concern was straightforward. If the allegation gained serious traction before it could be properly assessed, the damage to multiple reputations could be significant and lasting. His focus, at this stage, was not on emotion. It was based on facts, on establishing what was actually known, and on making sure that any response, when it came, was grounded in something concrete rather than reactive. That investigation was already underway, and what it would uncover was only just beginning to come into focus. The investigation that had been quietly set in motion inside Buckingham Palace was methodical by design. A senior member of the King's Security and Advisory Team was assigned to lead the review, tasked with going back through archived records, event guest lists, travel logs, and any available correspondence, both printed and digital that might shed light on whether the claims circulating in the press had any real foundation. The work was careful and deliberate, moving piece by piece through material that in some cases dated back more than 20 years. What the initial review appeared to suggest offered a degree of reassurance. The allegations, as they had been presented online and in certain media outlets, seemed to rest largely on second-hand accounts, vague recollections from social gatherings, and fragments of rumour that had been repeated so many times they had gradually taken on the tone of established fact. There was, at this stage, no concrete documentation, no verified photograph, and nothing that looked likely to hold up under any serious legal or journalistic scrutiny. For a brief period, it seemed as though the story might lose momentum on its own. Without fresh material to sustain it, online conversations can move quickly to the next topic. That, however, is not what happened here. Before the palace's internal review had reached any formal conclusions, something shifted the conversation dramatically. An image began circulating across social media platforms, and it spread with a speed that made any kind of official response feel immediately outdated. The photograph was low quality, with the slightly washed-out colouring typical of digital cameras from the early 2000s. It appeared to show a group of people aboard a luxury yacht somewhere in the Mediterranean, the kind of setting that in that era was associated with a particular world of wealth and access. In the centre of the image stood a young woman with dark hair and a confident expression. Beside her was a man who appeared to be Prince Andrew. His posture in the photograph was relaxed and informal, and the two figures appeared to be standing close together in a way that felt personal rather than ceremonial. The resemblance between the young woman in the photograph and Meghan Markle was, by most accounts, genuinely striking. That similarity was enough. Within hours of the image appearing online, it had been shared across major platforms, picked up by news, blogs, and reaction channels, and was being discussed by commentators across multiple countries. What had previously been an unverified verbal claim had now, in the eyes of a large portion of the online audience, become something that felt like visual confirmation. The shift in tone was immediate and significant. Tabloid coverage accelerated sharply. Headlines became more pointed. Analysts were brought in to discuss the photograph in detail, with some commentators focusing on body language and others calling on forensic image specialists to examine the technical aspects of the picture itself. Experts looked at things like facial features, bone structure, skin tone, and the consistency of lighting and shadows across the image. Some pointed to similarities between the woman in the photograph and Meghan. Others raised concerns about the image's authenticity, noting what they described as inconsistencies in pixel quality and lighting that could suggest digital manipulation. The conversation, however, had already moved beyond the question of whether the photograph was real. For much of the online audience, the more pressing question had become what else might be out there. Supporters of Meghan were vocal in arguing that the image showed clear signs of having been altered, either through artificial intelligence tools or more traditional photo editing software. They pointed to specific details in the image that they said did not add up technically. These arguments were made clearly and with some conviction, but in an environment where outrage tends to travel faster than careful analysis, they struggled to gain the same traction as the original claim. The people expressing the most certainty were often those with the least evidence, and certainty, even when it is misplaced, has a way of sounding authoritative when it is repeated loudly and often enough. The palace found itself in a position that has become increasingly familiar for large institutions in the digital age. It was responding to a narrative that it had not created and could not fully control. The internal review continued, but its careful pace was no match for the speed at which public opinion was forming outside the palace walls. Online forums had effectively become their own arena for debate. one where the standards of evidence were very different from those applied in any formal investigation. It was in this atmosphere that Meghan's team moved into action. The response, when it came, was structured and deliberate. Legal representatives contacted media outlets and social media platforms, sending formal notices regarding the circulation of what her team described as fabricated content. The legal firms involved were prominent ones, and the communications carried significant weight. Every aspect of the public-facing response appeared to have been carefully considered in advance, from the precise wording of the official statement to the visual presentation of Meghan herself. When she addressed the situation on camera, the statement was direct. The photograph, her team said, was not genuine. It had been manipulated, and any attempt to use it to damage her reputation would be challenged through every available legal avenue. The statement landed in a media environment that was already moving fast and in several different directions at once. For those who had been skeptical of the photograph from the beginning, the response felt like confirmation of what they had suspected. For others, the forcefulness of the legal reaction raised its own questions. Public opinion remained divided, with one side viewing Meghan's response as exactly the kind of clear and decisive action that the situation required, and another side noting that a strong denial is not the same as a resolution. Prince Harry was visible during this period, appearing alongside Meghan at a small charity event. On the surface, the appearance conveyed normality and solidarity, but observers who looked closely noted that he appeared strained. His body language lacked the ease of earlier public appearances, and reports from people familiar with the couple's situation described him as being in a state of genuine anxiety. The reappearance of Andrew's name in any public context connected to his wife stirred something uncomfortable for Harry, whose own complicated history with the royal family was never far from the surface. The broader consequences were beginning to show in other areas of their public life as well. The Sussex brand, which had been carefully built around values of openness, independence, and purpose, was showing signs of strain. Business partners were described as having become more cautious. Some professional commitments appeared to be subject to a period of quiet reassessment. This was the nature of a scandal that, even without definitive proof at its centre, had managed to shift perception in ways that were proving difficult to reverse. Back at Buckingham Palace, the investigation was reaching a conclusion that would, in factual terms, appear to resolve at least one central element of the story. A London-based tabloid, through what was described as thorough archival research, had traced the woman in the photograph to a different source entirely. Journalists working on the story went through old advertising records, model agency rosters, and promotional material from the early 2000s, and eventually identified the woman in the image as a semi-professional Canadian model whose facial features bore a strong resemblance to Meghan Markle. The model had appeared in a luxury yacht advertisement around the same period, which explained both the setting and the similarity that had caused so much confusion. The woman in the photograph was not Meghan Markle. The correction made its way into the press, and for a period, the pace of online commentary slowed. The Sussex household noted the development, and their legal team acknowledged the outcome. In purely factual terms, a significant pillar of the original allegation had been removed. Yet the sense of relief, both in Montecito and in London, was not complete. The photograph had been debunked, but the underlying questions raised by the original journalist had not gone away. The allegation itself, the claim that some form of prior connection existed between Meghan and Andrew, remained unproven but also, crucially, unresolved. And in a world where perception carries enormous weight, that distinction matters a great deal. The story had already done a portion of its work simply by existing, by being shared widely enough and discussed seriously enough that it had become part of the conversation surrounding both individuals, regardless of where the facts ultimately landed. To understand how the British royal family responds when a scandal reaches a certain level of intensity, it helps to look at what has already happened within the institution relatively recently. The case of Prince Andrew offers what is perhaps the most detailed and instructive example of how the palace manages a situation in which the reputation of a senior royal becomes a serious liability. What unfolded with Andrew over the course of several years established a template of sorts, one that made clear to anyone paying attention that the institution's need to protect itself will, when necessary, take precedence over the interests of any individual member of the family. Andrew's difficulties did not arrive suddenly. They built gradually over a period of years as questions surrounding his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, the American financier and convicted sex offender who died in prison in 2019, refused to go away. The issue had been present in the background of royal coverage for some time, but it was a television interview broadcast in November 2019 that brought everything to a head. Andrew sat down with a BBC journalist in what was intended, by most accounts, to be an opportunity to address the questions directly and move past them. The interview had the opposite effect. Public reaction was overwhelmingly negative, and the criticism came not just from tabloids or online commentators, but from serious journalists, legal professionals, and members of the public who found his responses unconvincing. Within days of the broadcast, Andrew announced that he would be stepping back from his public royal duties, describing the situation as a distraction to the work of the royal family. What followed over the next few years demonstrated just how far the palace was willing to go when it concluded that association with a particular individual posed an ongoing risk to the institution's credibility. In early 2022, Buckingham Palace confirmed that Andrew would give up his military affiliations and royal patronages. These were not minor adjustments. Military titles carry deep symbolic significance within British public life, and royal patronages represent the formal connection between a member of the royal family and the charities, regiments, and civic organisations they represent. Removing them sent a message that was understood clearly, both inside and outside the palace. Andrew would no longer serve as a representative of the Crown in any official capacity. He retained his title as Duke of York, but his role as a working member of the royal family had effectively ended. Later that same year, Andrew reached an out-of-court settlement in a civil lawsuit that had been filed against him in the United States. He did not admit any liability as part of that settlement, but the legal process itself had kept the story in the headlines for months and had ensured that his name remained associated with a period of serious controversy that many in the palace would have preferred to see contained. The settlement brought a formal legal conclusion, but public debate did not stop. The damage to perception had already been done, and no court ruling or official statement was going to undo that entirely. For King Charles, the Andrew situation represented something more than a family difficulty. It became a defining early example of what his approach to the monarchy would look like. Charles had spoken for years, long before he became king, about his belief in a leaner, more focused royal institution, one with fewer working members and a sharper sense of purpose. Andrew's withdrawal from public duties, though driven by scandal rather than design, aligned in practical terms with that vision. It also set a clear precedent. Public roles within the royal family are not guaranteed. They are conditional on the ability of the individual holding them to represent the institution without causing it harm. When that condition can no longer be met, the institution will act. This precedent is important when considering how the palace approached the more recent situation involving Meghan Markle and the circulating allegations. The specific circumstances were different in many significant respects. The claims against Meghan were unverified and, in at least one key element, had been directly contradicted by the identification of the woman in the photograph as someone else entirely. There was no legal process underway, no admission of anything, and no equivalent of the deeply damaging television interview that had sealed Andrew's fate. But the institutional memory of what had happened with Andrew meant that the palace was alert to the way these situations can develop if they are not managed carefully from the outset. The monitoring of the story's spread, the internal review, and the quiet assessment of its potential impact were all responses shaped at least in part by the lessons of recent experience. In the weeks that followed the most intense period of media coverage, life for Meghan and Harry took on a quality that several observers described as cautious and subdued. Meghan's public appearances during this period were marked by a restrained and considered approach to presentation. She appeared at charitable events and made herself visible in contexts that reinforced the values she had worked to associate with her public identity, compassion, community, and purpose. Her clothing choices during this time were notably understated. Her manner in public was attentive and warm but measured, as though she was conscious of the fact that she was being watched more closely than usual, and that any misstep would be noted and amplified. Those who observed her closely during this period noted that something had shifted, even if only slightly. The ease and confidence that had characterized many of her earlier public appearances seemed to have been replaced by something more careful. This was understandable given the circumstances. Even a story that is ultimately shown to lack solid foundation can leave a residue, a lingering question in the minds of people who encountered the original claim but did not necessarily follow the subsequent corrections with the same attention. Harry's experience of the aftermath appeared to be shaped by a different kind of pressure. In public, he maintained the appearance of stability and normality, standing beside Meghan at events and presenting a united front to the cameras. But those close to the couple described him as having found the episode genuinely unsettling. Part of this had to do with the reappearance of Andrew's name in any context connected to his wife. Given the deeply complicated feelings Harry has long carried about the royal family and its handling of various situations over the years, but there was also something more personal at work. The questions raised by the original allegation, even without proof to support them, had touched on a period of Meghan's life that predated their relationship, a time when her world and his had not yet intersected. For someone who had left behind an enormous amount to build a new life with her, the suggestion of hidden chapters was not easy to set aside, even when the rational case for setting it aside was clear. At Buckingham Palace, King Charles returned to the daily work of the monarchy with the matter formally reviewed and largely closed, at least in terms of the specific photographic claim. But those around him noted that he did not treat the episode as something that had been fully resolved. The photograph had been debunked. The model had been identified. The most concrete element of the allegation had been removed. Yet the original journalist's verbal claims, the suggestion of a prior connection stretching back to the early 2000s, remained in the public domain without ever having been either proven or definitively disproven. In the world of royal reputation management, that kind of unresolved narrative is understood to carry its own ongoing risk. It does not require new developments to remain present in public consciousness. It simply waits, available to be picked up again whenever the next relevant story comes along. Charles had come to understand this dynamic through long and sometimes painful experiences. The digital age has fundamentally changed the relationship between public figures and the stories told about them. In an earlier era, a correction issued by a credible source had a reasonable chance of catching up with the original claim and displacing it in public memory. That is no longer reliably true. A story that reaches millions of people within hours of appearing online will always have a head start on any correction, and the correction, when it comes, tends to reach a smaller audience with less emotional impact than the original claim. People are drawn to scandal and revelation in ways they are not drawn to clarification and retraction. This is not a new observation, but the scale at which it now operates is genuinely different from anything the palace had faced in previous generations. What this episode ultimately illustrated, across all of its stages, was the extent to which reputation in the modern era is fragile in a very specific way. It is not simply that false claims can damage a person. It is that the process of investigating, responding to, and eventually correcting those claims is itself a public event, one that keeps the subject's name associated with the allegation for the entire duration, regardless of the outcome. For institutions and individuals alike, this creates a situation in which there is no entirely clean path through a scandal. The best that can be achieved is a careful, measured response that limits the damage without feeding the story further, followed by a gradual and patient process of rebuilding trust and redirecting attention toward more positive ground. That work, for everyone involved in this particular episode, was still very much ongoing,